Okay, so moving on to our skirt. I have, this aside for a moment, I've sewn all of our pieces together into one giant cylinder of fabric, which is about 150 inches around. And this is going to be our top right here, top. And the instructions tell us to leave 6 inches open, and I'm sure that's so that we can step into it and then tie it together. So this is all going to get pleated down, this part, this width part, to fit my waist, or to fit the waist of the dress. Now, generally when I make one of these dresses, and this is the one I had on in the Washington's 03 enactment, I start with about 120 inches of fabric, which is around the bottom here, in 4 panels, and it all gets pleated down to fit my waist. And in that case, for those older fashions, we use these box pleats, and you can see that the pleats run out from the front and they go in toward the back, and they make that nice full skirt that tends to bunch up on the sides and give you that wide full look. And it ties together, so when I put on this skirt, you know, it ties in the front, and then the front ties over it, and I size it so that I get an inch or so of overlap on each side when I tie it together. So I have pretty much figured out how to box pleat something down to my waist size and do it pretty quickly, because I've done a lot of these. But this is going to be a different project entirely. Now, this all has to fit down to my waist size again, and in the instructions it gives us a few different options for pleating this. One is to simply gather it, which means we would sew some stitches through the whole thing and just pull the stitches and gather it together, and then attach that gathered part to the bottom skirt. The other option it gives, which is what I think I'm going to do, is an accordion pleat, which means we're just going to pleat the fabric in uniform pleats back and forth like this. Back and forth around the whole skirt. And stitch through that, and that's going to give us these really nice, I hope, uniform pleats around the whole width of the skirt. So I'm going to have to figure out how many of these accordion pleats I'm going to need to get the size down to my correct size. So I'm guessing there's going to be a bit of trial and error here, but that's going to be the next process, is to take this massive, huge cylinder of fabric and pleat it all down really nicely so that it will fit around the waistband of the dress. So let's see how this works out. Okay, so I'm getting ready to do these pleats, or cartridge pleats, or accordion pleats, and you can see that what we're going to be doing is stitching through the fabric at an equal distance all the way around, and then when we pull on those threads, we're going to get these little pleats that look like cartridges or an accordion. So I've gone ahead, and on the fabric I've marked it every ½ inch, and that's where I'm going to be making those stitches. So that's what I'll be doing next, and I'll be back once I have those stitches done. Okay, so I've put the little stitches in there to create our cartridge pleats, and I've started pulling some of the strings up just so you can see what these pleats look like. And you can see that pulling on that string gathers up the fabric and creates these little pleats. So I'm going to go ahead and pleat this up so that it fits the size of the bottom of the bodice and get ready to attach it. And I'll show you what it looks like when it's ready to attach. Well, moving right along here, I have the skirt assembled onto the dress, and I have the sash tied around it. I don't actually have the sash made, and a little bit of what the ruffle is going to look like. But I'm going to take this off of the dummy and show you how I ultimately assembled the skirt, because I did it one way and wound up tearing the whole thing out and doing it another way, and that still wasn't the way it was suggested in the instructions, and I'll show you why when we look at the inside of the skirt. So hold on just a moment. Okay, so here we are, the interior of the dress. This is the lined bodice, so that's the front, and this is the back closure here. And let's take a look a little bit at how I attached the skirt. Now, the original pattern for this dress was based on a real dress, and the instructions, of course, said to create either gather the skirt or create the little pleats, which I did. And it also said that in the dress that it was used from, each one of these little pleats was sewn directly to the bodice. And if you look at this silk, you can see it is disintegrated. It's just shredding like crazy. So I knew that that was not going to work in this case. So instead, taking a cue from some of the other skirts I made, if we look over here, you can see it underneath the waistband. I sewed a length of cotton linen tape to the skirt to hold all the pleats together, and then by hand I sewed, I think you can see it in here, I'm going to pull this away, I sewed that to the inside of the skirt. So I used that linen tape as a means of connecting the skirt to the bodice, and it came out really nicely. It also gave me the opportunity to put these ties on the back in order to make it nice and snug after I put it on and adjust it a little bit. And I really like that option. Of course, the ties will get tucked in. So this is how it looks under the waistband. And I'm not sure if I'm going to have to sew this down. I don't think so, since a sash is going to go around the waistband. Everything should stay in place pretty well. But that's a little bit of how I attached the skirt to the bodice. So it was a little challenging. I did it a different way and wound up taking the whole thing out and repleating it and sewing on the bias tape. And that worked out to be a really, really nice solution to my problem. So I guess if I were using a fabric that didn't unravel so easily, I would have used those original directions, but it became clear it wasn't going to work with the silk. So that's kind of what you do as you move along working on these projects, is you have challenges that you have to figure out how to meet them and how to make it work and have the garment still look as it should look when it's completed. So I'm going to move on now, and I'm going to start making the ruffles for the collar and the sleeves. All right, now I'm finally working on hemming the skirt. You can see I have my dress inside out on the ironing board, and I have measured the length of the hem with the help of Mr. Q, who last night pinned the hem up for me while I tried on the dress. And I do not have any pictures of me wearing the dress because I don't want anyone to see it until I wear it tomorrow, but it looks phenomenal. It looks like something out of a, I don't know, Cinderella fairy tale. I mean, it looks really beautiful, I just want to say. So this is how I do my hem. I pin up my bottom and I iron it. And I had to cut a lot of fabric off, so that's my 2-inch cutting line where I trimmed the fabric. And then what I'm going to be doing is, let me take this pin out, see if I can do it here, is I'll be folding this down and ironing it all the way around, and that is where I will do my seam. And I assume that is going to be the bulk of my afternoon and evening, is going to be hand hemming this entire dress, and then it'll be all finished for tomorrow. I just want to say that I did decide against ruffles on the sleeves. I put the ruffles on one sleeve and it was just too much for me anyway, so no ruffles on the sleeves. I did finish off the cuffs though. So I'm going to get to work on this hem, and then I'll put it on the dummy and show you how it looks when it's all finished and hemmed. And then my next project, of course, is frizzing and powdering my hedgehog hairdo wig. Just an example, here's that raw edge. See the raw edge here, folded down and pressed and ready to be stitched, because we don't want to sew through the raw edge, because as I showed you before, let's take a look up here. You can see the raw edge of this silk unravels too easily, so we don't want to do that. We want to have a nice clean hem with no bare edges, so we're just going to fold that raw edge under. I fold about 1/4 of an inch under, and I do keep a somewhat wide hem just in case I change shoes and this hem the dress becomes too short in my new shoes, or I need to let it down for some reason. I do have a little bit of a hem here to work with. Okay, so moving on to make the lace ruffles. I didn't realize it when I bought this, but this piece of lace has a very complex pattern in it, and this is going across the width, which is about 45 inches wide, and I have about 47 inches. So I asked for a yard, and they kindly gave me more than 1 yard. Now the piece I was using for the sample, you can see, looks really nice all gathered up. Unfortunately, this pattern does not repeat again in this piece of lace. So I can't get enough of this to go around the neckline gathered, so I'll be using this pattern for the sleeves. So it took me a while to look at this and find a pattern that repeats so I can get a long enough piece of it. The entire neckline is 37 inches, which means I'm going to need about 54 inches of lace gathered to half its size. So I did find this pattern here that repeats really nicely with scallops on one side and these nice little dongles here, and it repeats again on this side of the lace. So I will be very carefully cutting this out. I don't know if you can see it, but that's netting here. That's all netting in there. Let me pick it up over here so you can see it better. So that's just netting, and that makes it pretty easy to cut. So I'm going to very carefully cut out these two repeats of this pattern and then show you how I gather them. It's just a gathering stitch that I put right down the middle of the lace. Okay, here's our lace all cut out, and you can see the really nice scallop pattern on each side of this, so that's going to be really pretty. I also, just to let you know, used this little tiny pair of scissors in order to cut around that delicate pattern so that I would accurately get around the pattern without cutting into any of the lace stitches themselves. So we're going to take these and we are going to sew a gathering stitch right up the middle, fold it in half, gather it, and see what we get. Okay, gathering the lace, you can see I have the needle here in the lace. Just a really long basting stitch, and I'll just go along the whole length of the lace with that. And when it's finished, of course I have it knotted at the end, when it's finished I'll just pull on that thread and it will all gather up very nicely. So you can see I have gathered up the ruffles and pinned them around the neckline of the dress. Now, an interesting dilemma I met when I was doing this is that I mentioned that I was going to be using two pieces of ruffle sewn together because I don't have one piece long enough to fit around the entire neckline. So of course when I was doing that I realized that I did not want the two pieces to meet right here in the front where the patching or the joining would be obvious. So instead I took the one piece I have and put the center front at the front of the dress and laid it so that it comes right around here to the shoulder, you can see. And on the other side, I've already patched in. I took my second piece of ruffles, cut that one in half so that I would have two smaller pieces that will then fit right around the back. And you can see I've already put this one on. So on this side, you can see the whole ruffle is there. And the next thing I'm going to do is just pin the last piece into here, and those will be ready to be sewn on. I think this has a very nice drape, especially with these little ends that stick out here. Very nice. And the sash is going to be the last machine sewn part of this garment, so I figured I would get that out of the way. So what I did was I just took a bunch of this silk, and I want my sash to be 3 inches wide, so I cut two 54-inch lengths at 7 1/4 inches, because with a 5/8 seam allowance, folded in half with the seam allowance, that will give me a 3-inch tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this in half. I'm going to sew it, and that'll give me a long tube. I'll attach the two ends of these together first. Over here I have one end. I'll attach the two ends together, and then I'll fold it in half, sew a seam, turn it inside out, and that'll give me a long 3-inch wide tube that will serve as my sash. So let me do that and show you how that works. Okay, let's take a look at what I've done so far. I've sewn our two 7 1/4 wide pieces of sash fabric together. Here's the seam, and I've pressed it open and I have it pinned down, and now I've folded that piece in half, so I have two, 3.5 or so pieces wide of sash material. Now I've gone along and measured 3 inches from the fold all the way across, because that is going to be my seam line, and I want to make sure when I'm finished I have a nice even 3-inch wide tube of fabric. And then after I've sewn that, I'll trim the seam down and turn it inside out or right side in. I've also pinned the fabric together because it's really slippery and I don't want it to slide around as I sew. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this too. I will sew one end closed and I'll keep one end open, which I'll use to reverse it, and I'll show you how to do that in a moment. And by the way, I should have mentioned earlier in the project, if you're wondering what I'm marking my fabric with, this is just a chalk pencil. I think this is a Koh-i-Noor art pencil. They also do make Taylor chalk for sewing, and I like to use chalk because it wipes right off, or if you're washing the garment, it washes right off and you don't have any permanent marks. There are other ways people have of marking, but I really like these chalk pencils, and I have them in a whole bunch of colors. So in case you were wondering, that's just chalk. We have our sash. We have our tube turned right side in, and the open end I've pinned, and I'll hand stitch that closed. And we have our nice blue sash all ready to go. And there's that middle seam again, holding it together. And hopefully this will look really, really nice once I put it on. So just to see how it looks, I've tied it onto the dress. Looks quite nice. And excuse me, I have to step over my doggy here. Just give me a moment to walk over him. And here's the back. I have a nice bow tied in the back, so I think it looks quite nice. Excuse the glare from outside. It's a beautiful day here in New York City, nice and bright and sunny outside, as you can see. And I hold up the sleeve, and there's our sash, all tied and ready to go. Not bad. I think we're getting there. There's a nice view right there. Nice. Well, here we are. After 3 hours of hand stitching, the hem is completed. So that was quite a chore, but no problem. I had a movie on while I stitched it all up. And these ruffles are really spectacular. I can't wait to wear this tomorrow. I've got the sash nice and pressed, nice and flat. And you can see this from the side. It just looks so pretty. So pretty. And even the back view of this is lovely. So the neckline in the back is really nice with the ruffles and the sash. So all done. So you've seen it now from beginning to end. My 1790s robe and chemise, or chemise a la Reine, made in silk, taffeta, and lace. Very, very nice finish, I think.